The photograph had been in the Holloway Museum's collection for decades before anyone truly looked at it. It was October 12, 1907, when archivist Lenore Hargrave lifted the velvet cloth from the display drawer in the subsection 3B. The air in the room was still, close, thick with the smell of old varnish and paper pulp. Dust shimmered in the light of the tall eastern window as she leaned over the glass case, a clipboard in one hand and a stub of graphite in the other. She'd been cataloging daguerreotypes all morning, their silver nitrate surfaces glinting like frozen mercury. Most were portraits, stoic farmers, weary widows, grave-eyed children, and she moved quickly, her notes efficient, almost mechanical. Then she reached Plate A 113, B 45. At first glance it was ordinary. A family trio, seated formally in front of a dark velvet curtain. The father wore a dark wool coat, chin high, the stiff discomfort of the era etched into his posture. The mother sat beside him, gloved hands folded at her lap, mouth pulled tight, not sad, but unreadable. The boy between them looked to be 5, maybe 6, thin shoulders square, hair parted neatly at the crown. In his small right hand, he held a toy wagon, carved from wood, one wheel slightly cocked. Hargrave blinked. There was a candle. She leaned closer. It was mounted in a brass stand, placed just to the right of the boy's knee, centered perfectly for balance. The flame was clear, delicately captured. No blur, no fog from motion. The photographer had done fine work, but it pointed downward. Not in the sense of a trick candle curling in draught or breeze, no. It bent, with uncanny precision, toward the floor. The taper itself remained upright, rigid in the holder, but the flame seemed to have been tugged by some unseen force, forming a single, unnatural tongue of fire that hung rather than burned. And it did not waver. There was no halo, no distortion, no smoke that twisted oddly. Just the flame, defying everything she understood about light, heat, and combustion. Hargrave stepped back from the glass. Her stomach tightened. She flipped her clipboard and scribbled, "Candle defies gravity. Frame shows no sign of tampering. Photographer unknown." Her fingers trembled slightly as she circled the note twice. Later that afternoon, she requested the museum's curator, Dr. Ellis Norwood, to accompany her to the archive. Norwood, a stiff man with a failing eye and a fondness for the rationale, peered at the plate through his monocle, then without it, then again through a loupe. "The emulsion is undisturbed," he murmured. "No reapplication. No carving, scratching, reversal. This isn't an optical illusion." "What then?" Hargrave asked, her voice lower than usual, her gaze fixed on the boy's face. His eyes seemed to drift, not quite at the camera, not quite away from it. Norwood straightened, replacing the cloth carefully over the drawer. "It's likely an effect of exposure timing. Or improper chemical balance. It happens." Sometimes he cleared his throat. Still, best keep it filed under anomalies. But she could tell he didn't believe his own words. By the following week, the plate had been sealed in a climate-controlled drawer, the air vacuum pressurized and glass triple-layered. A white label was added discreetly to the display's edge. It read, in typewriter font, "Do not invert." The instruction baffled new interns. Some assumed it was to prevent condensation streaking. Others thought it referred to preservation technique. Only the curators knew the truth, that years earlier, an unnamed assistant had inverted the frame during routine dusting and had to be hospitalized within the hour. The incident was recorded as acute disorientation and temporary aphasia, but Hargrave privately described it as unsettling animal terror. The man never returned. Interest in the plate grew slowly but steadily. By 1920, physicists from Braithwaite Institute requested scans. In 1931, the Catholic seminary at Dalkin sent a delegation of clerics. In 1944, Two scientists attempted to recreate the effect using warped lenses and chemical refraction. They failed. Every theory met contradiction. The candle never changed. Its flame never softened, never distorted with time. Years passed. The boy's expression became the subject of speculation. Was he blind? Tranced? Ill? His gaze did not meet the lens, but neither did it drift away entirely. It hovered, as if fixed on something invisible, something below him, beneath the floorboards, beneath the frame. Viewers often felt upon looking at him a pressure behind the eyes, a pulling sensation, subtle but present, as if the image were not content to be observed, but was, in fact, observing in return. At a preservation conference in 1965, Dr. Reuben Merriweather famously declared during a lecture, "This image is not a record of light. It is an interruption." A breach. The line was met with laughter, but Merriweather had not smiled. In the decades that followed, only one instruction remained on the museum's internal catalog card, updated with every restoration and archival review: do not invert. And even still, yet what you're seeing may not be the most disturbing thing about this portrait. The ledger was found by accident. It was the winter of 1961, and the old portrait studio on Elmsby Street was being converted into a gift shop by the new owner, a retired railway clerk named Martin Griggs. He had planned to turn the cellar into storage for tourist souvenirs and had ordered the crumbling plaster stripped from the north-facing wall. The workers barely noticed the loose stones at first until one struck the hollow behind them with a chisel and revealed a narrow cavity packed with rotted straw, broken glass, and, wedged flat against the masonry, a leather-bound ledger streaked with mold. Griggs didn't know its value. He thought of throwing it out with the rest of the debris, but something about the red wax seal on the inner flap, unbroken, with the faint impression of a six-pointed star, made him hesitate. He brought it to the Holloway Museum that same evening. Curator Walter Finch took one look at the binding and summoned the museum's document archivist, Henry Larn. The two men, seated beneath a hanging Edison bulb in the museum's conservation room, cut the seal together. The smell hit them first, an acrid blend of mildew and chemical fixative, sharp as vinegar. Larn coughed and turned the first page with tweezers. The handwriting was elegant, if slightly faded, a series of scheduled sittings listed by date and surname, stretching from 1868 to 1881. But the entry that stopped both men cold was dated October 3, 1879. J. and L. Kirst. 2 p.m. Next to the names was a single word, written in hurried script: failed. Below that, in a second hand, shakier, thicker, and in a darker ink, were 6 more words, pressed so deep into the page that the nib had torn the parchment slightly. Do not reprint. Subject: exposure reversed. Larn leaned back, his fingers trembling slightly. "That's not a photographer's note," he whispered. "That's a warning." Finch narrowed his eyes. "Do we have the plate?" Larn didn't answer. He was already halfway across the room, flipping through the museum's index catalog. He pulled file number A113B-45 and removed the inventory card. Portrait of man, woman, and child with single candle, brass stand. Image condition, excellent. Noted anomaly, flame direction. "No negative," Larn murmured. "Just the plate." No name listed for photographer. They both looked down at the ledger again. The page had begun to curl slightly in the warm air of the room. Finch closed the book and held it to his chest as if it might shift in his hands. That night, Henry Larn requested permission to examine the portrait more closely. By morning, he had prepared a short report, mostly technical, with references to photographic methods of the late 19th century. But near the end, he added a single line, almost as an afterthought. "Recommend restricted handling until subject behavior can be independently verified." 4 weeks later, while processing a shipment of antiques from the Windham estate sale, Museum intern Peter Malloy discovered a sealed safe among the contents. The label read, "Studio Storage, Elm Street, Lot 31. Malloy logged the find but wasn't authorized to open it. It remained untouched until 1983, when the museum hired conservator Greg Hanley to reevaluate long-term storage materials. Hanley cracked the safe after 3 hours of careful drilling through a rusted outer hinge. Inside, among rusted tools and curled tin frames, was a single envelope, yellowed, brittle, and bearing no return address. On the front, in tight, angular handwriting, Dr. Ellery Kress, Blandford College, private. Hanley delivered it directly to Curator Finch, who had the contents examined under controlled lighting. Within the envelope was a folded note, a clipped newspaper article dated 1881, and an old, water-damaged calling card that read simply, Dr. Ellery J. Kress, Optical and Naturalist Studies, Blandford College. The note, written in faded brown ink, bore only a single paragraph. The subject behaved contrary to expectation. Reflection did not follow motion. Reversal persists in still form, but resists replication. It is not a mirror error. It is, I believe, an image of something looking back. Kress had been known in academic circles for studying illusion patterns in insect vision, polarized light behavior, and parallax in stereoscopic images. He had published a treatise in 1876 titled The Inward Lens, which theorized that some optical illusions were not merely errors of sight, but fractures in the relationship between light and time. But after 1881, Ellery Kress stopped publishing altogether. No obituary, no record of retirement. His last known correspondence was with a colleague in New Haven, who noted Kress had grown unnaturally reclusive and often spoke of fixations caught in glass. In 1996, during renovations at Blandford College's archival wing, a sealed valise was found behind the collapsed backing of a cabinet in the Naturalist Hall basement. Inside were dozens of sketches, optical calculations, and diagrams of light inversion through unknown prisms. Tucked in the corner was a personal notebook, its leather cover warped with age. On page 47, in Kress's unmistakable hand, the child did not face the lens. The exposure captured him turning toward the floor. The flame is not inverted. It was obeying something we cannot name. To this day, the museum keeps the notebook sealed behind tempered glass in the third-floor vault. Scholars who've read it describe it as mathematically plausible, but physically absurd. In the margins of the final page, written sideways as if added in haste, was one final line. He never published on this case, but his personal notebook was found in a sealed valise after his death. It began with the lamplighter's scream. At precisely 6:45 p.m. on October 3, 1879, Thomas Grieve, a sturdy man in soot-streaked trousers and a woolen cap, stood frozen on the cobbled corner of Main Street and Alder Lane, one hand still wrapped around the brass snuffer pole used to extinguish the lamps. The other trembled violently, pointing toward the far end of the street where the mist rolled heavy and strange. "I saw him," Grieve muttered to the constable minutes later, voice dry as brick dust. "I swear to heaven I saw the cursed boy walking backwards, but it weren't the legs what moved wrong. It was the light what didn't fall right upon him." His words made little sense to the onlookers, but to Thomas the image remained seared in memory. The boy, Robert Kirst, drifting up the slope of Main Street, toy wagon in hand, chin low, shoulders slack, but feet gliding with eerie precision in reverse, and the street lamps, each one carefully lit just minutes earlier, seemed to dim as the child passed under them, as though recoiling. No one else saw it. No one else believed it. But Thomas Grieve returned home that evening without finishing his route, and never lit a lamp in Windham Hollow again. That same night, inside the cursed home on Bellwether Street, the silence was broken only by the faint rustle of fabric and the sound of glass tapping against glass. Lydia Kirst stood motionless in the parlor, her dress unfastened at the collar, eyes vacant. She had placed the portrait, the one from earlier that day, face down on the floor. Her hands hovered above it, palms twitching slightly, as if repelled by some invisible current. Her husband, Jonathan Kirst, a mill foreman and a man of few words, watched her from the hallway with growing concern. He had already heard from the studio that the photographer claimed a replating might be needed. Something about the exposure being strange, but he hadn't expected to return home to find his wife in a trance, their son nowhere in sight. "Lydia," he called gently, stepping forward. "Where's Robert?" She blinked, slowly, as if waking underwater. "He walked away from the flame," she whispered. Jonathan's heart gave a sharp twist. "What flame?" Her voice didn't change. "He walked away from the flame. He walked away from the flame again, and again, the same phrase." By the time Dr. Mallory arrived the next morning, Lydia hadn't spoken anything else. Her meals sat untouched. Her body trembled when touched, but her eyes never blinked when the candlelight in the room flickered. On October 7th, Lydia Kirst was admitted to Hawthorne Asylum under the diagnosis of non-responsive distress and circular speech. Her file would record the phrase repeated endlessly by nurses. He walked away from the flame. And yet, Robert Kirst was not with her. He had not been seen by neighbors since the day of the portrait. Constable Reed made the first inquiry to the schoolhouse where the teacher confirmed Robert hadn't returned since October 3rd. The school logbook noted his absence, but no formal withdrawal. The boy's books were still on the desk. His name remained on the attendance roll for weeks, scratched out eventually with a single line. The police launched a quiet inquiry. Not a full investigation. Windham Hollow was a town that liked to keep its own rhythms undisturbed, and Jonathan Kirst, for all his grief, refused to speak of the photo. The studio had returned it with a brief note. Replating unsuccessful. No alterations documented. The plate was left untouched, hidden behind a cabinet in the Kirst home for years. In 1924, long after the house was abandoned, the portrait resurfaced in an estate sale. A collector acquired it and submitted it for testing through the Holloway Museum. The emulsion, surprisingly, was intact, period accurate, and yet scientists examining the image noted the same impossible feature. The candle flame, captured clearly on the brass stand, flowed downward, smooth, undistorted, with no photographic haloing, no lens warping, no blur that might suggest movement. No contemporary camera model can reproduce a flame facing downward without distortion or blur, read the final report, stamped and filed in the museum's private archive. But by then, the town had already forgotten the boy who walked up Main Street in reverse. The town forgot the flame that pointed the wrong way. The museum did not. It locked the portrait in a climate-sealed drawer marked Cabinet B9. And over the years, docents and archivists alike would find themselves pausing when passing that cabinet, some uncertain why they walked slower near it, others refusing to meet the glass drawer's gaze. But what lingered longest, what refused to fade, was a single entry from the asylum record, written in a nurse's neat script. She repeated a single phrase to nurses. He walked away from the flame. He walked away from the flame. 13 minutes after Thomas Linley entered the Holloway Museum's restoration chamber, he burst out the door. His breath came in gasps, a sharp rasp against the cold stone hallway. Pale sweat clung to his brow and his gloved hands trembled uncontrollably as he leaned against the wall, eyes darting toward the sealed room behind him. A junior clerk passing with a tea tray froze mid-step. "Are you all right, Mr. Linley?" the boy asked, voice hesitant, uncertain. Linley didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a torn envelope, thrusting it into the boy's hands. "Put this in the file." "Tell no one to touch the reflection," he said, voice cracked and brittle like frostbitten glass. "Do not handle the candle reflection." "Do you understand me?" The boy nodded, dumbfounded. Linley straightened with effort, removed his gloves one finger at a time, and walked toward the exit with the gait of a man who had aged 20 years in a quarter hour. He submitted a leave request before sunset. He never returned to the museum. The envelope remained, creased, stained, and labeled in a hurried scrawl, "Do not handle candle reflection." 2 weeks later, Oscar Hall took over Linley's position. A younger man, confident and technically skilled, Hall dismissed Linley's departure as eccentricity, perhaps brought on by age or fumes from cleaning agents. On his first day, Hall requested access to the subvault where plate A113B45 was stored. He lasted less than 5 minutes. When the guards opened the vault at the sound of crashing glass, they found Hall collapsed on the tiled floor, unconscious beside a mirrored comparator. The stereoscope he had been using lay shattered next to him. Paramedics later reported no injury, no seizure, no stroke, just a sudden, overwhelming faint. When asked what he'd seen before blacking out, Hall stared at the ceiling for several seconds before whispering, "It moved the wrong way." Not just the flame, everything around it bent. The portrait was returned to storage. In 1932, it was Professor Edwin Malkin of the Braithwaite Institute who requested to examine the image again, this time under twin-lens stereoscopic conditions. He arrived with a mobile lab of his own design, rolled in under brass wheels and lined with velvet trays. Malkin was a methodical man, known for his research into visual inversions and dual-field optical illusions. To him, the photograph was not a curse or curiosity, but a challenge. He adjusted the twin lenses carefully, logging each click of the mechanism in a leather-bound notebook. The photograph lay beneath, secured by clamps. His assistant, James Merrick, stood nearby with a Kildare vector lamp, ready to take refractive readings. "Let's begin," Malkin said quietly. As the dual image came into focus, Malkin's breath caught. In the normal lens, the candle sat upright, its strange downward flame captured as still and firm as the boy beside it. But in the mirrored lens, where left and right were inverted, the flame shifted. It didn't flicker. It moved. Not like a breeze had touched it, but like it had noticed something. "Note this," Malkin said, though his voice trembled. "Left-right inversion is anomalous. The flame, it leans further left, unprovoked. Motion does not match light physics." Merrick turned on the vector lamp and aimed it slowly at the plate. The beam, meant to track refractive anomalies, passed cleanly over the parent's clothing, the brass stand, even the boy's eyes. But when it crossed the candle, it fractured. The measurement flicked wildly. Merrick adjusted the dial and tried again. "All shadows align," he muttered, scribbling in his notepad, "except the candles." He stepped closer, then paused. "What's the angle?" Malkin asked. "Refractive angle, 186 degrees," Merrick replied, voice unsteady. "Inverted by an unknown vector." The light, somehow, was bending away from gravity. Malkin reached for the museum catalog card that had accompanied the plate since its donation. He flipped it over, searching for inconsistencies. Instead, he found a note scrawled decades ago in a tight, hurried hand. "Vertical inversion without refraction artifact." He pressed his palm slowly over the note, then looked down at the photograph again. "The candle's flame was not retouched," he said, more to himself than to Merrick. "It was recorded that way at the moment of exposure." The candle's flame still pointed downward in the photograph. It had not changed, not in the 57 years since it was first catalogued into the Holloway Museum collection. And yet, in 1971, as the digitization of the cursed portrait was underway, the mystery reignited. 3 men stood in the museum's archival scanning room, staring at the black-and-white plate housed under a glass clamshell viewer. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The room smelled of dust and ozone, like static wrapped in paper. Julian Moresby, the museum's preservation lead, adjusted his gloves and carefully lowered the scanner lid. Beside him, forensic archivist Daniel Lanning chewed the inside of his cheek, notebook pressed tight to his chest. Across the table, Dr. Harold Greaves, a physicist brought in from Fenley Institute, peered at the image as though it might blink. "Run it again," Lanning said quietly, his voice tight with curiosity. Julian sighed, pressed the button. The scanner light slid slowly across the plate, casting a moving white bar over the etched faces of the cursed family. The mother's eyes, the father's posture, the boy's unfocused stare. But always, always the candle. The flame angled down, impossibly crisp. No distortions, no light halos, no signs of double exposure. Greaves tapped a pencil on the glass. Emulsion layers clean. Sodium light test showed 0 warp. That shouldn't be possible. Julian nodded, but didn't speak. He'd seen anomalies before, smudged ghostings, optical reversals, but this one unsettled him. The stillness of the image was part of the problem. It didn't feel captured. It felt preserved, like a lock, not a memory. That year, after the plate was officially digitized, the museum reopened the file. Theories began to surface. Dr. Elaine Moorcroft, head of photographic chemistry at Aldmere College, was the first to respond to the museum's inquiry. Her theory: photographic malfunction. Specifically, emulsifier drift due to chemical seep through poor silver halide bonding. Her tone was clinical, precise. If the plate was exposed near ammonia vapor, she wrote, it could cause vertical density shearing, enough to create inversion artifacts. But when the image was re-examined under both sodium and potassium light at varying frequencies, the chemistry held. No smearing, no density bubbles. The flame was intact. Straight lines, clean edges. Worse still, the smoke. Greaves pointed it out during a rescan. "Look here," he murmured, zooming in. "See this ribbon? That's smoke. It curls up, normal direction. But the flame?" Still going down, Lanning ran a hand through his hair. "That rules out inversion during exposure." "What are we looking at, then?" Julian asked, voice low. "Not a chemical flaw," Greaves answered. "Something orchestrated." That led to the second theory: staged fraud. Lanning took the lead on that one. He'd seen hundreds of manipulated daguerreotypes, reflections painted in, exposures doubled with razor-sharp precision. He proposed a bold possibility. The photo had been taken with the subjects positioned upside down, the camera and candle mounted overhead, to create the illusion. It'd be difficult, he admitted during the panel, but not impossible. With the right rig. But again, the smoke defied this. In a demonstration, Lanning recreated the setup using an inverted tripod mount, then exposed a long-duration plate using a mock candle. Even at high exposure times, the smoke blurred. It smeared like breath on glass. The cursed photo, however, captured the smoke upward and clean. No mechanical setup from the period could do that, Greaves concluded. The flame and smoke contradict. They're not reversed, they're split. That's when the third theory took hold, the one no one wanted to admit aloud: metaphysical rupture. The museum reached out to John Isley, a folklorist known for his extensive research on early American portraiture. Isley arrived carrying a battered leather satchel and a soft-spoken demeanor. He wore tweed, round spectacles, and a constant look of half-formed concern. In the museum's conference room, he set down 3 photographs. One showed a girl beside a fireplace. Another, a young boy holding a lantern. Both dated in the 1870s. Both featured flames, and in both, the flame pointed down. These images, Isley began, come from separate regions: Vermont, Maryland, and now Massachusetts. All share 3 traits: a downward flame, a vanished child, and a prohibition against reprinting. Julian leaned forward, frowning. "Are you saying it's not a coincidence?" Isley tapped the photograph of the cursed boy. "Look at his eyes." They're not unfocused. They're fixated. On what? Lanning asked. Isley's voice dropped. Not the camera. The silence in the room became heavy. Beyond the conference door, the museum was quiet, long past visitor hours. Isley opened his satchel again and retrieved a journal. This belonged to a photography assistant in 1876. He noted that when his mentor developed a plate with a downward flame, the room's temperature dropped. Light sources flickered. Julian glanced toward the nearest ceiling light. Of course, Isley continued, this isn't scientific. But something about these images feels less like distortion and more like direction. What do you mean? Lanning asked. The flame, Isley said slowly, is not burning. It's pointing a beat past, then another. Pointing where? Greaves whispered. Toward something not of this frame. That night, Julian stayed behind. The image haunted him, not in a theatrical way, but in the precise wrongness of it. He'd tried flipping the scan, inverting the colors, zooming to pixel level. But nothing changed the sensation that the photograph wasn't revealing something, but rather guarding it. He returned to the scanner at midnight. Alone. Just one more pass, he told himself. As the light moved across the plate again, Julian stared at the child's eyes. For a moment, just a heartbeat, he thought he saw movement in the candle's edge. Not flame, not smoke. A line, a ripple, a reach. He blinked. It was gone. He reached for his notebook, hands trembling. Behind him, one of the overhead bulbs buzzed louder, then went dim. Julian stood up, heart pounding. The air felt heavy, like humidity, but colder, and underneath it, something else. A pull. He turned back to the scanner, but the light had shut off, and the flame on the screen, just for a second, had disappeared entirely. His breath caught. His hands went clammy. There are moments, he whispered, echoing Isley's words, when photographs do not capture time, but reveal what presses against it. At 3:17 a.m., the temperature in the Holloway Museum's sub-vault dropped by 12 degrees. Neil Dorey didn't notice it immediately. He was too focused on the drawer in front of him. Cabinet B9, bottom tier, left side. The flashlight balanced in his mouth flickered once, then held steady, casting long, narrow beams against the metallic runners. The archive room around him was silent, save for the soft clink of brass and the whisper of old air vents. No one else was in the building. He had signed himself in after hours, logged the task as inventory reconfirmation, and descended the stone steps into the museum's sealed undercroft. The drawers groaned on their rails as he pulled one open. Inside, encased in a velvet-lined frame, was plate number A113B45, the cursed portrait. He didn't need the logbook to know what it was. The moment he saw the downturned flame, his breath caught. Something about it always unsettled him, but tonight the sensation was different. It wasn't fear, it was pressure, like something was waiting. He adjusted his magnifier, angling the light across the surface of the plate. Every detail was there: the boy's slack expression, the brass stand, the odd angle of the candle's flame. He leaned closer, searching for the faint hairline in the emulsion he believed he'd seen during digitization the week before. The magnifier trembled in his grip, either from cold or nerves. Then the light shifted. It wasn't from the flashlight, he was certain of that. The shadows beneath the drawer flickered, bending unnaturally as though something underneath the cabinet was drawing them inward. He knelt instinctively, pressing one hand against the stone floor, listening. And there it was, a faint metallic tapping from beneath the tiles. Soft, rhythmic. Neil's breath clouded in the air now. Frost prickled on the brass handles. His magnifier slipped from his fingers and cracked on the floor. He didn't pick it up. Something was under the floor. He pressed his palm flat against the stone and whispered, "Is someone there?" The words left his lips too easily, like they'd been waiting to be spoken for years. His voice didn't echo. It simply vanished into the cold. Then came the whisper. Not loud, but felt more than heard. It sounded like a boy's voice, high and distant, just beneath the stone. Words lost in layers of dust and decades. He couldn't understand it, but it chilled his spine. Suddenly, the portrait inside the drawer shifted. Not much, just a shudder. The runners creaked and then warped outward, brass bending in smooth arcs against gravity. The frame didn't slide, didn't fall. It stayed perfectly still as the rails groaned outward like something inside wanted out but refused to break the glass. Neil fell backward, heart hammering. His flashlight rolled across the vault floor, casting broken patterns on the stone ceiling above. The whispering grew louder, though the voice did not. Then everything stopped. Silence reclaimed the room. The temperature steadied. The shadows returned to their proper corners. The portrait sat still, inert. Neil didn't get up. He lay trembling on the cold stone floor, hands curled over his chest, eyes fixed on the cabinet. By the time the museum's security team found him at 3:42 a.m., he was barely conscious, murmuring to himself and clutching the broken magnifier in his fist. The guards thought he was having a seizure, but the medical team later reported no signs of trauma. Just extreme hypothermia localized to his skin, despite the room's recorded temperature holding steady at 68 degrees Fahrenheit after the initial drop. Neil's muttering never made sense to the doctors, but it was logged in the report and repeated by museum staff during the inquiry. He was under the floor. After the incident, Holloway Museum sealed the vault indefinitely. No one entered Cabinet B9 again for 30 years. It wasn't until 2020 that the archive team reopened the sublevel during the institution's digital preservation initiative. When the cursed portrait was scanned that year, its metadata showed a single anomaly, a horizontal inversion lasting precisely 1 second before restoring itself. No one witnessed it. It occurred during automated processing. 2 other portraits scanned during that same session displayed similar glitches. Both featured children and flame. Both now reside in isolation chambers, flagged with permanent handling restrictions. Present-day docents report subtle flickers beneath drawer B9 if the overhead gallery lights are turned off. Some say it's an electrical quirk. Others refuse to stay past dusk. The museum has no record of Robert Kirst after October 1879. No baptism, no funeral, no census entry, not even a grave. Visitors still ask what the flame was meant to illuminate, but the staff no longer answer. The candle may not have lit the room, but something else entirely. Disclaimer: this script is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, institutions, and incidents are invented or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental, created solely for entertainment.